Empty shelves, silent ports, protests spreading in the streets. Experts warn that 96 hours without trucks can bring hunger, and in a month, a city falls. Yet throughout history, certain crops could quietly feed millions. Without fertilizer, chemicals, or commerce, they thrived where today's food system would crumble. But just as global seed banks were built to save our future, these survival staples were pushed aside, nearly erased from collective memory. Why would crops that could prevent collapse vanish from the vaults, meant to secure humanity's next meal? Beneath the surface of the global food system, a parallel network operates quietly, almost unseen. In neighborhoods, villages, and the outskirts of cities, seeds change hands without a price tag, passed from gardener to gardener, from elder to child. These exchanges rarely leave a paper trail, yet they have outlasted empires. The crops in this hidden network are not the ones that fill supermarket shelves or drive commodity markets. They are chosen for their stubborn ability to survive, growing in poor soil, thriving without fertilizer, and multiplying themselves underground. Anthropologists have documented these informal seed exchanges across continents. In West Africa, women carry slips of cassava wrapped in leaves, trading them at markets where no official records exist. In the Andes, potato tubers are swapped at highland festivals, each variety named for its shape, color, or the legend it carries. In North America, sweet potato vines are snipped and shared between neighbors, sometimes slipped over fences or left on doorsteps. These networks have no central authority, no annual catalog, and no advertising. Instead, their strength lies in memory, trust, and the promise that a single tuber or cutting can multiply into a harvest large enough to feed a family, or a block, or a village when other supplies run out. This decentralized system stands in sharp contrast to the supply chains that modern cities depend on. When trucks stop, shelves empty in days. But these survival crops, quietly propagated outside of commerce, are built for disruption. A single Jerusalem artichoke planted in neglected ground can yield kilograms of food by season's end, and it needs no fertilizer, no irrigation, and no chemical spray. In urban gardens from Sydney to Sao Paulo, tubers and perennial greens outproduce conventional crops by 2 to 4 times per square meter, simply because they are chosen for resilience, not appearance or shelf life. The people who keep these crops alive rarely appear in reports or policy meetings. They are the community custodians, the keepers of a living portfolio that exists outside the logic of commerce. Their work is not a protest or a movement. It is a habit, inherited and repeated, a quiet insurance policy against the next failed harvest or broken supply line. In a world where food security is measured in truckloads and trade routes, this invisible network offers a different kind of safety net, built not on contracts, but on the stubborn persistence of plants and the people who remember how to grow them. The evidence of this system is everywhere, if you know where to look. And its existence raises a simple question. If these crops can thrive in the shadows, why were they left out of the vaults meant to protect our future? During the Second World War, entire cities faced the threat of starvation as enemy blockades cut off food shipments. In Britain, with ports targeted by German U-boats and imports falling by over half, the government issued a call to action. Every available patch of land, from city parks to backyard lawns, was to be turned over to food production. Within months, public green spaces across London, Manchester, and Glasgow were dug up and replanted, not with wheat or fragile greens, but with potatoes and other root crops that could survive poor soil, unpredictable weather, and minimal care. Agricultural records from 1942 show that these emergency gardens produced over 1 million extra tons of potatoes alone, enough to supply more than 3 million people for an entire winter. The pace was astonishing, and in some cities, entire parks were converted to tuber beds within weeks. Their yields were measured not in bushels per acre, but in calories per square meter. potatoes, Jerusalem artichokes, and turnips, each chosen for their ability to store energy underground, became the backbone of urban diets. An agrarian historian described the transformation. By the summer of 1943, you could walk through Hyde Park and see rows of potatoes where there used to be lawns. The city had become its own farm. These crops required little fertilizer, could be planted with hand tools, and most importantly, could be harvested gradually and stored for months in cellars, or even left in the ground as a living pantry. The calorie yield was unmatched by traditional grains grown in the same spaces. A single square meter of potatoes could deliver up to 4 kilograms of food, enough to meet the daily energy needs of a family for several days. Even under rationing, these urban harvests bridged the gap between dwindling imports and the population's needs. This was not a one-off experiment. Similar strategies surfaced in Leningrad during the siege, in Tokyo after the war, and in Havana during the special period. Each time, cities under threat turned to the same class of crops, those that could thrive with little and multiply underground. The historical record is clear. When supply lines fail, cities can feed themselves, but only if they have access to crops built for survival, not for commerce. A survival crop does not simply endure. It is engineered by nature and tradition to thrive under pressure. Deep beneath the ground, roots stretch 2, sometimes 3 meters into the earth, far below the reach of most grains. Cassava sends its taproot deep enough to draw water and nutrients when the surface is bone dry. In the Andes, yams and potatoes anchor themselves in rocky soil, their tubers swelling with stored energy even when the rains fail. These crops do not ask for fertilizer or irrigation. They find what they need season after season without outside help. Unlike annual grains that must be replanted every spring, many of these crops are perennial. Once established, a stand of Jerusalem artichoke will return year after year, multiplying underground. Kernza, a perennial cousin of wheat, grows back from the same roots for half a decade or more. This means less labor, less risk, and a harvest that keeps coming, even if the world above ground is in chaos. Yields tell the story. In low input conditions, cassava yields between 10 and 25 tons per hectare, sometimes 4 times the output of wheat grown with fertilizer. Sweet potatoes and yams match or exceed the productivity of soy or corn, but without the need for chemical sprays or irrigation systems. A single square meter of potatoes can produce up to 4 kilograms of food, dense with calories and vitamins. In urban gardens, these crops routinely outpace conventional vegetables, producing enough in a small plot to feed a family for weeks. Calorie for calorie, these roots and tubers are the quiet giants of food security. While wheat and corn store their energy in fragile kernels above ground, tubers keep it safe beneath the soil, protected from drought, pests, and even war. When other crops fail, the harvest waits underground, ready to be dug up as needed. This is not just resilience, it is insurance built into the biology of the plant. Survival crops are not optimized for profit or appearance. They are designed for the worst days, when nothing else will grow. Their very nature makes them immune to the shocks that cripple modern agriculture, and their independence from annual seed and chemical inputs sets them apart from the crops that fill the world's granaries. That same independence, however, would soon become their greatest liability in a food system built on dependency. Seed catalogs and corporate reports tell a different story from the one written in backyard gardens. In the global seed market, 4 firms, Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta, and BASF, control more than 60% of all commercial seed sales. Their business model is simple: crops that require annual investment, not crops that persist year after year on their own. The modern seed industry was built on hybrids, plants bred so that their offspring do not reliably resemble the parent. Farmers who save hybrid seeds face unpredictable yields, so nearly every season they return to the same companies for new stock. This cycle turns seed into a subscription, and the subscription into a $150 billion industry. The most profitable crops, corn, soy, and wheat, are designed for this system. Hybrid corn, first commercialized in the 1930s, transformed American agriculture by locking farmers into annual purchases. By the 1980s, the hybrid model had spread worldwide, and the consolidation of seed companies accelerated. Today, a handful of firms set the terms for what gets grown, what gets stored, and what gets forgotten. Survival crops disrupt this logic. A single Jerusalem artichoke planted in spring can multiply into dozens by autumn, with tubers that store underground until needed. Cassava and sweet potato propagate from cuttings, not seed, and require no annual purchase. Perennial grains like kernza regrow from the same roots for years. These crops do not need fertilizer contracts, pesticide packages, or irrigation systems sold by the same conglomerates. In economic terms, they do not create repeat customers, they create independence. The financial incentives are clear. Seed companies invest in crops that guarantee a steady stream of revenue, not those that offer self-sufficiency. The more a farmer can save, replant, or share, the less value that crop holds in the corporate ledger. Even public research follows this current. Government and foundation grants flow toward crops with market potential, not those that thrive in neglected fields or abandoned lots. When seed banks decide what to preserve, these incentives echo in their vaults. Collections are dominated by crops that sell, not crops that survive. The result is a genetic archive skewed toward dependence, while the plants that could outlast disaster are left in the margins, maintained by a shrinking group of custodians, or not at all. The logic of the market, multiplied over decades, has quietly shaped the future of food. Inside the world's seed banks, the rules of preservation are set by biology as much as by policy. Not every plant can be dried, frozen, and stored in a vault for decades. The standard method, desiccating seeds and locking them away at -20 degrees Celsius, works for wheat, rice, and soy. These are called orthodox seeds. They tolerate drying, survive freezing, and can be revived years later with a little warmth and water. But the crops that have carried people through disaster, the ones that store calories underground and multiply by cuttings, rarely fit this model. Cassava, yam, taro, sweet potato, and Jerusalem artichoke produce what scientists call recalcitrant seeds, or none at all. Their living roots and tubers cannot survive drying or freezing. To save them, banks must use expensive cryopreservation or keep living plants in greenhouses. That process can cost 10 to 100 times more than storing grain seeds. This technical divide shapes what gets preserved. In the world's largest gene banks, orthodox seeds fill the vaults by the millions. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, built into the Arctic permafrost, holds over 1.3 million samples, mostly cereals and legumes. At the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, maize and beans account for the majority of accessions, while cassava, despite feeding 500 million people, is represented by just a fraction of that number. Across CGIAR banks, cereals can outnumber root and tuber accessions by 4 or 5 to 1. For crops that cannot be frozen, collections are smaller, more expensive to maintain, and more vulnerable to power cuts or funding gaps. The result is a silent filter. Preservation protocols, designed for convenience and cost, favor crops that fit the orthodox model. As a result, the genetic archive of the future is skewed toward what is easy to store, not what is hardest to kill. The plants most likely to survive a collapse, those that thrive on neglect, propagate themselves, and store calories underground, are the least likely to be backed up in the world's vaults. The system is not built for resilience, but for what fits the freezer. And as storage rules harden into policy, the gap between what can be saved and what is actually preserved grows larger every year. In the years after World War II, the world's farms became a testing ground for a new kind of agriculture. Food aid programs, backed by American surplus and foundation grants, shipped wheat and maize across continents. Alongside the shipments came fertilizer, pesticides, and the promise of higher yields. The so-called Green Revolution took hold in the 1960s, offering a package of improved seeds, synthetic inputs, and modern machinery. Governments in Asia, Latin America, and Africa signed on, encouraged by international lenders and development agencies. With each new harvest, fields that had once held dozens of local varieties, land races adapted over centuries, gave way to a handful of high-yield hybrids. Adoption curves soared. In India, fertilizer use jumped from less than 1 kilogram per hectare in 1960 to over 100 kilograms by the 1990s. In Mexico, the spread of improved maize and wheat varieties replaced native strains on millions of hectares. The numbers tell the story. By the 1980s, more than 75% of Asia's rice came from just a few varieties bred for fertilizer response. Yet for every bumper crop, something else vanished. Landrace diversity shrank as farmers abandoned roots, tubers, and hardy perennials that had fed their families through drought and war. The new seeds demanded irrigation, chemicals, and annual purchases. Aid agreements often required countries to import not just grain, but the whole technological package, locking them into cycles of dependency. Agricultural historians point to this period as the beginning of genetic erosion on a global scale. The shift was not just about what grew in the field, but about who controlled the future of food. The world's seed vaults and gene banks began to fill with samples of commercial cereals, while the resilient crops of the past slipped quietly from both fields and collections. The legacy of that era still shapes the risks cities face today. When Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico in 2017, trucks stopped rolling and city shelves were empty in less than a week. For nearly a month, most supermarkets stayed bare. Urban planners later confirmed that grocery stores in American cities typically hold just 3 to 5 days of inventory. One storm, one blockade, and the food is gone. The official reports tally lost shipments and supply chain failures, but the real story played out block by block in neighborhoods where sweet potatoes and cassava grew in backyard plots. Families bridged the gap, sharing harvests while the ports stayed closed. An urban planner who studied the aftermath put it plainly. Our system is efficient, but brittle. We have traded resilience for convenience. When the trucks stop, the city has no backup. The numbers are clear. More than 70% of perishables in American cities rely on daily deliveries. There is no buffer, no hidden reserve. When the chain breaks, hunger spreads fast. Yet, outside the headlines, a different kind of resilience persists. In the highlands of Nigeria, a woman named Mama Chinyere tends cassava slips handed down through generations. Each year she shares cuttings with neighbors, even as new seed laws threaten fines for unregistered exchanges. In the Andes, a Quechua elder buries potato tubers beneath stone markers, keeping varieties alive that will never appear in a catalog. These custodians operate under growing pressure, sometimes from laws, sometimes from markets, always from the risk of being erased. But their work is not nostalgia. It is survival, practiced and proven every time disaster cuts off the city from the world. The lesson is not hidden in policy or profit. It is written in the hands that pass a tuber, the memory of a harvest that outlasted the storm. These crops and their keepers remain, not because they are profitable, but because they make independence possible. In a system built for dependency, that is the one thing that cannot be tolerated. Today, the world's largest seed vaults hold thousands of commercial hybrids, while resilient survival crops remain rare or absent. as climate shocks and supply disruptions accelerate. Food security now depends not just on technology, but on the genetic diversity quietly slipping away. In every seed withheld, there is a choice: dependence or resilience. The harvest of that decision will feed, or it will starve, tomorrow's cities. What future are we planting?